And we are live. What is up, everybody? Missed you like crazy. Let's see. Been sick the past 5 or 6 days. Usually never get sick, so I don't know what's floating around out there. I hope that it's not like, I don't know. I would almost venture to say bird flu, because last time I got sick like this, it was the beginning of 2020 before anybody was freaking out. So I swear to God, I'm usually not one who gets sick, but something pretty potent hit me for the past couple days. Before that, we are building out the VT AI webinar. That was a sick result. Highly recommend you go check it out. Put a lot of time into it, but that's where I've been at the last 2 weeks. But holy S word, I'm not going to say it in the first 8 minutes because of the algorithm. But yesterday, crazy amount of news come out. Let's see. So, I mean, today we're going to go over who is Tim Walz, pretty scary VP pick from Kamala. Yesterday, a U.S. base was hit in Iraq, but looks like by Iran or an Iran proxy. Yesterday, everybody thought the market was crashing. I wasn't really too much in that camp of thinking because I've been following this thing called the yen carry trade that everybody ended up talking about for like a month now, because I listen to guys like Brent Johnson who are way ahead of the curve. So we might go over that later. And then this UK civil war, a lot of gaslighting going on from this new prime minister. So we have, total chaos from the, people who are coming to the country, who are migrating to the UK. Total silence from law enforcement when they're making waves. But as soon as somebody who's a actual citizen of the UK starts to complain about what's going on, the new prime minister starts threatening them. So we're going to talk about that. And then this really went under the radar. So Google has an antitrust monopoly violation against it. So a federal judge said that Google is in violation of the monopoly rule, which, I mean, yeah, duh, of course it is. But what are the implications? Are they actually going to enforce anything? And then more regulation potentially coming down the pipeline for Google. I mean, is it just all speak, or are they actually going to do something? Wait till you see this chart I have to show you about how much of the search engine market share Google has, and then how dependent they are on this one revenue source. I think a lot of you might know that, but I'm going to show you a visual breakdown of the really power center of Google and their nucleus of revenue. And X filed a lawsuit today against something that's very important. So this institution called GARM, it's pretty much like the advertising monopoly for who gets to monetize their content and the companies that are a part of that. And once Elon took over X, they stopped getting payments from these companies that were part of GARM. So it's almost like a weaponized unit. So we're going to look into who's behind that, when it started, and very interesting timing. So before we get into all that, if you have not had the pleasure of seeing what this Kamala VP pick's all about, so we already have the most far left candidate probably in our lifetime of Kamala. Now let's hear what this guy has to say.
Get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Huh. So that's not something most people want to hear. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. Those are words that'll just totally destroy a country. Look at Venezuela. And then this is this guy's wife. Remember what Minnesota looked like during 2020? It looked like literally hell on earth. But check this out.
Those first days, when there were riots, I could smell the burning tires. And that was a very real thing. And I kept the windows open for as long as I could, because I felt like that was such a touchstone of what was happening.
And that's what it looked like, and that's what she's reminiscing about. So she's a psycho. She's reminiscing about the smell of the burnt tires, and she made sure the windows were open so she could just drink it in. And this is not the Middle East. It's not a war-torn country somewhere in the Middle East, believe it or not. This is Minnesota at one point over the last 4 years. So drink that in. And I came across this a few minutes ago. Pretty crazy stuff. So this guy, Waltz, he's I guess using fraudulent valor claims. So listen to what this guy is claiming that he did.
Again, to wage a public war of words against Tim Walz.
He abandoned us. You know, I mean, what the hell kind of leader does that? I mean, he just, as soon as the shots were fired in Iraq, he turned and ran the other way and hung his hat up and quit.
We'll get to Barron's new message for voters in a moment. But this all starts years earlier when Barron says Walz's misleading statements about his military service first led him to come forward in the fall of 2018.
So you try to get this message out, but Minnesota's largest newspaper checks it out, says it's 100% true, but yet refuses to print.
When I hung the phone up, I said, what the hell is this, North Korea?
Back in 2005, a warning order went out to the 1st Battalion, 125th Field Artillery to mobilize for a mission to Iraq. At the time, Walz served as the unit's highest non-commissioned officer, but months later, Walz would retire from the Guard, avoid the deployment, and run for Congress. Tom Behrens was next in line for the position and was asked to take his place.
I was like, well, for Pete's sake, if this guy quit, and if I say I'm not going to do it, I mean, what the hell kind of leadership is that? If a company would say that we're going to deploy to Iraq or somewhere and you're going to be gone for whatever amount of time, and then the foreman just says, no, I'm not going. I mean, what does that say to the 500 people that work in that factory?
Behrens would go on to serve in Iraq on a nearly 2-year deployment as a command sergeant major. All while Walz began using that title as a congressman. Behrens says he first contacted Walz with his concerns, sending these letters to Washington. They all went unanswered.
But then we fast forward to the election in 2018 in Minnesota, and you try at that time to get people's attention with this story and also with what seems to be a very misleading statement that he continued to make about his service.
It kind of just sat there. You know, when he was a congressman, he bragged that he was a command sergeant, retired command sergeant major. I'm the highest ranking person ever in the House, and you know, all this lie that he was telling. The state of Minnesota came out after 2018, after this was exposed, and they said, well, he can say that he served as a command sergeant major, but he can't say he's a retired one because he's not.
And that's what he was saying.
And he was saying that, and there was lots of lots of cards coming in the mail, for him to be elected. They said right on there he's a retired command sergeant major, just tooting his own horn, just hanging on the coattails of people that actually are command sergeant majors that went through all the process and put all the time in.
A spokesperson for the Minnesota National Guard said Walz wasn't able to retire as a command sergeant major since he failed to complete coursework and requirements related to the rank. Verified documents show the Army corrected his service record. Walz was reduced in rank to an E8 Master Sergeant after retirement and his conditional promotion. Alpha News again asked Governor Walz if he's using the command sergeant major rank on his campaign website for political gain this year. A spokesperson said this has been in the news before and pointed us to a past story where Walz said, quote, normally this type of partisan political attack only comes from one who's never worn a uniform.
It's stolen valor is really what it is. I don't know of anybody else that's done what he's done, but we called it the truth about Tim Walz.
In 2018, Behrens gave the story the full court press.
We, retired command sergeant majors of the Minnesota National Guard, feel it is our duty and responsibility to bring forth the truth as we know it concerning his service record. I put together information on it and I sent it out to every single radio station and newspaper and TV station I could in the state. The bottom line in all of this is gut-wrenching and sad to explain. When the nation called, he quit.
Twin Cities TV stations and the Star Tribune were silent, even after Behrens says the newspaper checked it all out. The Star Tribune endorsed Walz in 2018 for governor. Between lockdowns, riots, unchecked crime, and a charred police precinct, Behrens felt he had no choice but again to come forward.
Allowing that to be burned down was just like having the Alamo get burned down. It's like, no, you defend that to the last man. If he would have went to Iraq, he'd still be hiding under his desk over there. Because that's just the cowardice that I seen portrayed with him.
So how about when he also comes out and he calls you guys 19-year-old cooks?
I'd take any 19-year-old cook before I'd go to war with him. I don't know how he could even utter such a statement. I mean, that's just absolutely sad.
So this election year, it's all built up again to Barron's new green bin message.
He called Jacob Fry an abject failure. So I was like, that's what he is.
Walz is a traitor, also made a return.
And the last one I put together, he said it himself too, as well. If they don't like my job, they can vote me out. So I wrote, we got to vote him out. We need to vote him out.
So there you go. That is who Tim Walz is. Not a lot of respect from the average person, and probably one of the worst things you could do in terms of lying about a military career and misrepresenting yourself. So that's who they would decide to go with. And, it's a real interesting confliction that the Democrat Party ran into, because it sounded like for a bit that Josh Shapiro was the front runner to be the VP, the governor from Pennsylvania, because they need Pennsylvania. The guy seemed like a, pretty polished Gavin Newsom type of dude. Definitely a lot of skeletons in his closet. But it turns out, and I mean, they're making it sound like the reason they did not go with him is because the Democratic side would not be willing to have somebody who's Jewish on the ticket because of how they feel about the Israel-Palestine situation. So it's a interesting type of self-devouring situation that's going on with Israel and Palestine, what's doing to the Democrat Party, because traditionally traditionally Jewish people will always vote Democrat, and it would normally, I don't know, would it normally be the Republican side that has a problem with that? I don't know about that, but it sounds like they went with this guy to appease their base, and they had much safer picks they could have went with. I mean, Josh Kelly, not a fan of him, but sounded like a much more safer, sellable pick. I mean, well, he was in the military, an astronaut, blah, blah, blah. But this guy, I mean, talk about cities that were unnecessary disasters that are, hellholes. Minnesota, oh my God, it was like the center of chaos during 2020. Speaking of centers of chaos, I think it's necessary to talk about what's going on in the UK now. We're going to get into this in a much deeper way on Unusual Suspects tomorrow at 6 p.m. live. But so check out what we have going on in the UK, and then check out what the new UK Prime Minister has to say about this. Pretty interesting. So this is Manchester. It's not Pakistan or some war-torn countries. This is Manchester. We've seen videos of them, what have you. So we see videos of police getting beat up, people being threatened, stores being robbed. We hear the stories of, little kids being stabbed by people immigrating to the UK from the Middle East. But don't hear a lot of press, mainstream media criticizing that, and you don't hear a lot of UK political figures or politicians or law enforcement criticizing that, but this is what you do hear.
Individuals will be held on remand, charges will follow, and convictions will follow. I guarantee you will regret taking part in this disorder, whether directly or those whipping up this action online and then running away themselves. This is not protest. It is organised, violent thuggery, and it has no place on our streets or online.
So he's not talking about the people that are immigrating there that are committing crimes. If you take a look at this article right here to get his exact terminology, ready? Check this out. Check this out. Ready? UK new Prime Minister slams far-right thuggery after attack on hotel housing asylum seekers. It's from the Huffington Post. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer strongly condemned an attack on Sunday at a hotel housing asylum seekers that saw at least 10 police officers injured, one seriously, describing as a far-right thuggery. In a statement from 10 Downing Street Sunday afternoon, the Prime Minister vowed that the authorities would do whatever it takes to bring these thugs to justice and that justice will be swift. Stammer's statement came as more violence broke out across the country in the wake of a stabbing rampage at a dance class that left 3 girls dead and many more wounded. So that's the real interesting thing about this that I think people are correctly outraged about, is that why is he speaking with so much more passion and zest and earnest to bring certain people to justice? It's not in response to 3 citizen little kids, innocent girls getting stabbed by somebody who came from outside the country and committed a violent crime inside the country. That's not what he's outraged about. He's outraged about people that are from the country being outraged about somebody coming from outside their country and committing a crime and killing somebody. So I ask rhetorically, of course, what are the motivations of this person? Why is it that we see this, collective effort mindset in Western countries to look the other way when people who immigrate to the country illegally commit crimes? And then when the people who are residents of the country are upset with that, they come down hard on those people, with the fury of 1,000 suns, and threaten them, put them in jail. The media criticizes them, calls them racist. So what are the motivations of people who find themselves on that side of the political aisle? And I mean, that seems to be I always say, you could tell who has the wind of the establishment at their back versus going against them. Somebody like Hunter Biden or anybody in the Biden family, the Clintons, has the wind of the establishment behind their back. Somebody like Trump or Elon Musk, post becoming based and buying X, has the wind of the establishment going against them. Very different things. Wind of the establishment at your back. You get away with anything. They cover stuff up for you. They downplay it. They won't even talk about it. They'll create distractions when you get into trouble. But when you have the wind of the establishment going against you, they're always on the lookout to trip you up in the slightest little way. They're actively looking for stories that are hit pieces on you. So again, I asked this rhetorically because I know the goal of this is mass immigration to erode our culture in the West and to, make it easier to implement this one world government system. And the more you destroy the middle class, the easier it is to implement socialism. I know, I get that. But one must ask, what is the outcome that these people are being promised? I mean, I always assume that's either threat or blackmail, but what is it that's motivating so many politicians and people in law enforcement and people in the media to just go right ahead along with this and, make excuses for these crimes that are being committed by people who came to a country illegally? I mean, are we missing something? Are we being gaslit? Is it not as bad as we're saying? I mean, so I looked up today, what percent of UK is now Muslim? It's only 6%. And we're seeing these giant crowds, causing chaos in some places. I mean, maybe there's a chance it's like the thing where the people on the weather, like on the Weather Channel will go to like one little section and be like, oh yeah, it's flooding, but it's like one little uniquely cut out spot that just has water going through it. But you look around, it's not that bad. Maybe that's the case in the UK. Maybe they're just fixating on certain parts where there's big concentrations of Muslims. But I don't think tens of thousands of people would be protesting if it was a small, contained situation. And I mean, if it's at 6% right now, it's causing this big of a problem. They're estimating, I think, that it'll be double digits within a couple of years. What's that going to look like? And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. And I don't know how many of them plan on going to Europe, because see, the complication with this is it's totally different from people from South America going from South America to North America. For the most part, they immigrate pretty well. They have the same, life objectives, goals, things they care about, values. But somebody who's Muslim getting plopped into Europe, totally different outlook on life and vision of what's important to you and how to operate and what's right and what's wrong. Two totally different philosophies just being merged with each other. So whoever is forcing that, I think their outcome they're aiming for is chaos, because how could it be anything but chaos if you force two totally different ways of life to coexist together, and then you're suppressing the crimes that are committed by the by the immigrants that you help get there illegally, and then you're amplifying any little bit of displeasure by the people who are the residents that are the taxpayers there, and you're threatening to throw them in jail because of just protesting it and complaining about it. That's pretty crazy. So could talk all night about this one. I'm actually planning on watching this documentary by a guy named Tommy Robinson. I think he has like 40 million views on X. I started watching it earlier today, but did not get to finish it. I'm definitely going to watch it before we talk about Unusual Suspects tomorrow. So definitely check that out tomorrow, 6 o'clock, Unusual Suspects. And next on the list, so let's go with quick rundown of what happened in the stock market. So very interesting thing with the stock market. I'm just going to talk this one out real quick. So there's this thing called the yen carry trade, right? So what happened with that? Japan was like the only country left in the world who had their interest rates at 0. Everybody else had it at like 3, 4, or 5%. So what was happening is all of these big institutions that, trade all day, every day, they were borrowing money in yen at 0% interest, and then buying stocks like Nvidia with it. All right. So this works out great because you're saving money on the interest. So, I mean, the crazy thing about this is that we've all been saying, why isn't it the 5% rates impacted the US stock market at all? I mean, we went from 0% to 5% within like, I think either less than a year, maybe 18 months at the very most. So everybody's saying, why hasn't the rates impacted the US stock market? Well, big reasons, because, normally a reason it impacts is because you stop borrowing to buy stocks because it's not as cheap. But if you're able to go to a different country, just this one country who has 0% rates still because of a systematic problem that they have where they can't put rates at a certain level, then you essentially still have 0 rates. You have 0% rates still if you're able to work around the 5% rates in your country. So some people are estimating that this is a $10 trillion situation where there's potentially $10 trillion worth of yen borrowed to buy US stocks. So think about that for a second. And what set this thing off the other day is that I'll show a chart of this quick. The yen started to strengthen just a little bit because they raised rates. So let's say yen to dollar exchange rates. All right, ready? Check this out. All right, see? So in the past month, see that quick rise up? So the yen got stronger because they put interest rates up. And when that happens, it gets far more expensive to pay back the borrowed yen that you borrowed in bulk to buy US stocks. And at the same time that it takes more dollars to pay back the yen that you borrowed, the asset that you bought with that borrowed yen money is going down because everybody else is doing the same thing. So essentially, I mean, Wall Street always finds a workaround to squeeze, the best situation out of the cards they've had dealt to them possible. And, I mean, it's a smart thing. A lot of people made a ton of money off the yen carry trade, and it's definitely not over. I mean, yesterday was just a little air pocket that got exposed because I think some of the calculations people were doing, you could have went from being up 3x on a trade to down 9x on a trade because of how much more expensive it got to pay back your yen that you borrowed. So don't want to nerd out and get all deep into that, but that's one of the biggest things that happened yesterday. And I mean, I think that we all know realistically we're due for a pretty big pullback in the market. I mean, yesterday was nothing. It was like what? The S&P went from I think 56 to 52. It's like 4%, 3%. I mean, whenever the big liquidity event happens, I think it's going to touch around 4,000. But I mean, this is just me talking shit. Because I heard a really good breakdown of this the other day, that for those of you who really know about this stuff, the what is it? We've been doing quantitative tightening for the past year now, I think, which here, I'll pull up a chart. Quantitative tightening. QT Fed. So what that means is that the Federal Reserve is shrinking its balance sheet, shrinking the amount of bonds that it owns. Instead of buying bonds, adding liquidity to the market that was not previously there, they're letting their bonds expire, and that's reducing the amount of money that's in the system. And that is the main driver of asset prices. 1 second. I'm going to show you this chart. Fed balance sheet. Here we go. All right, boom. Fed balance sheet. So this is basically the amount of bonds and mortgages that the Fed buys, or the Fed owns right now. It peaked at almost 9 trillion in 2022, but they started selling or letting it expire, roll off their balance sheet in 2022. This little spike right here, something I made a big deal about. This was the what the hell was the acronym for it? This is what they did during Silicon Valley, where they were buying the bonds back face value from the banks, and they're trying to act like it wasn't QT, but it was QC, or excuse me, that it wasn't QE, but it was QE. The Bank Term Funding Program, that's what it was called. So today we're all the way back down at 7.1 trillion from a high of 8.9 trillion. Now that's a big chunk, especially when you're talking about global liquidity, because, trust me, global liquidity, the amount of money in the system, that's the biggest contributor to how much to what asset prices are. That's why everything exploded higher in the 70s after they took us off the gold standard. And I mean, if you're lucky enough to have bought a house before, during the 70s, you kept up with inflation pretty well. So no, I went on a bit of a rabbit hole or tangent there, but oh yeah, I brought this up to say that I heard this really smart professor guy say a few weeks ago that we've reduced the money supply by like 4% in the past year or something like that, and the only time we've like never done that without there being a significant market crash or whatever. And that he was saying that the Fed is not cutting rates fast enough with how quickly we're reducing the money supply. But let's be honest, this is all uncharted territory. I've been expecting the market to go down for the past 4 years. Literally, like, I didn't even think it was going to bounce back after the big COVID drop. I mean, I've always had a bearish bias because everything is just so crazy when you look at it, that it's like miraculous that the thing is still propped up. But since 2008, the Fed has really, conditioned people into just drinking the Kool-Aid that everything's going to keep going up. I mean, we've done quantitative easing since 2010. I mean, if you got in then, you're in a pretty good situation. I'm jealous of the people who blindly listened and followed to that, because you made out pretty well. But you would think that the correction's got to happen pretty soon, but you also got to factor in the situation where we just injected 6 trillion into the economy. Like, we don't have a case study for how that impacts the stock market, or how long that impacts the stock market for. We've never doubled the amount of money that's in the entire system before. So that could be a 10-year thing where it props up the market. It could be, at the tail end of it right now. Who knows? I mean, maybe we've established an entirely new floor, but if you look at just keep going into a rabbit hole here, but this is something that we got to question. Let me pull up the S&P. So if you go to an all-time chart of the S&P, ready? Like, it just looks silly. Here we go. Bear with me. If you go to an all-time chart of the S&P, it just looks silly. We're go back to the 90s. You're bopping around 1,000. Yeah, nothing crazy. Then, like I said, after 08, start doing the QE. Boom, boom, boom. Nice steady rise to 2,000. Little dip. What was that? There's a little uncertainty dip in 2015. Then under Trump, rips higher. COVID, pullback, and then boom, inject the money into the economy. Start raising rates. Miraculously, still goes up after raising rates, and then here we are. I mean, again, totally guessing, talking out my ass. Who the hell knows? I wouldn't be shocked if it gets back to 3,000 eventually someday. I mean, I hope it does, because I feel like a chump throwing money into this right now. But I definitely am of the mindset that's a responsible thing to do, to dollar cost average yourself into the S&P over the course of your life, because, I mean, look at it. Start from any point here, and you're in a good situation if you dollar cost average yourself into the S&P over the course of your life. Just, it's an uncomfortable thing to deal with it, looking at it at the very top. But I don't know, maybe this will be a 10,000 in 4 years. Who knows? Anyway, that's the stock market breakdown. This Google anti-monopoly thing, I want to touch on that quick. So it went super under the radar because of whatchamacallit, all the crazy stuff going on yesterday. But if they're going to be serious about this, it's a great thing, because especially with what happened the other day with we were looking at Trump. If you went to type in his name, if you type in President Donald, it would come up with Donald Duck. Ready? So let's check this thing out. All right. So New York Times, quote, Google is a monopolist, judge rules in a landmark antitrust case. The ruling on Google search dominance was the first antitrust decision of the modern internet era in a case against technology giant. So Google acted illegally to maintain a monopoly in online search. By the way, it has 90% of the total market. And let me show you this real quick. I think this is important to show before we really get deep into this. Google search engine market share. Like, I could just say the number, but the visual of this, you can't beat it. Ready? Check this sheet out. Ready? Bear with me. Boom. Isn't that disgusting? Ugh. 90.7% of the search engine market is dominated by Google, and they won't even show that a president got shot in the face, or a presidential candidate got shot in the face, or pre-prompt his name. So can't have that. That's my biggest opposition to Google having that much of the market. I mean, if you have a superior product, love it, great, totally, whatever. I don't want the government getting involved. But if you start operating as a political entity and own the market share at 90%, then totally not cool with that. Let me finish this article before I delve into the whole opinion rant about this. 1 second. All right. Boom. So Judge Amit Mehta of the U.S. District Court of for the District of Columbia said in a 227-page ruling that Google had abused a monopoly over the search business. The Justice Department and states had sued Google, accusing it of illegally cementing dominance in part by paying other companies like Apple and Samsung billions of dollars a year to have Google automatically handle search queries on their smartphones and web browsers. Quote, Google is a monopolist and has acted as one to maintain its monopoly, Judge Mehta said in his ruling. So, quote, this is one of the most important antitrust cases of the century, and it's the first big slate of cases to come down against big tech, end quote, said Rebecca Haw Allensworth, a professor at Vanderbilt University Law School who studies antitrust. Quote, it's a huge turning point. What the judge said in his ruling, after having carefully considered and weighed the witness testimony and evidence, the court reaches the following conclusion. Google is a monopolist and it has acted as one to maintain its monopoly. Judge Mehta's ruling capped a years-long case, U.S. v. Google, that resulted in a 10-week trial last year. The Justice Department and states sued in 2020 over Google's dominance in online search, et cetera, et cetera. So another thing that we should be vigilant about here. Where does it say it? It says somewhere that there's another case that's going on. Where is it? I need to find this because it's important. Google faces another federal antitrust case over ad technology that is scheduled to go on trial next month. So I hate when the government gets involved with things because I think it's toxic, but mark my words, you would never, ever, ever have a monopoly if it wasn't for the government getting involved. You would never have a monopoly if the government didn't get involved. And the government wouldn't enable somebody to become a monopoly if they weren't benefiting from it. So this is just my old opinion here, but I'm of the school of thought that Google and the government arranged a nice little deal together where one side gets all the data, no questions asked. One side's able to do what they need to do to gain market share, have favorable regulation and policy. Maybe the government looks the other way when it's convenient, and Google, passes them some data when it's convenient. Have you ever wondered why there's very loose regulation around the whole data collection thing that we know everybody in the world, every business in the world uses? I mean, who knows for sure, but I'm of the school of thought that it's because the government doesn't want any red tape getting in the way of collecting data because it's basically reading your mind. But think about how powerful of a weapon that is, that Google is 90% responsible for showing you results to questions you ask. So you could have absolute gold buried tens of pages, because hundreds of pages back would be probably ridiculous, but who knows how many. I mean, have you ever clicked next page when you go into Google search, type something in, scroll to the bottom? How often do you click next page? Super rare for me. I mean, maybe sometimes I'll do 2 or 3, but have you ever gone to the 10th page of a Google search? Super rare, and they know that. They definitely have data on how rare it is for people to click on next page. So if they want to bury a certain article, they can make it impossible to find. I remember the other day, I was looking for an article that this guy was showing in a YouTube video, typed in every word of the article, couldn't even get it to come up, and I had to basically type in an entire paragraph and put all special keys and commas and whatnot to make the thing show up. It's insane. So that's controlling information, and being able to control information allows you to control the narrative. So even more so than the principle of it being a monopoly, I care deeply about this because they decide to act as a political entity. So break that shit up. I hope the government's serious about this. They also said the same thing about Apple earlier this year, that's violating the monopoly, blah, 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 whatever it is. And yeah, they are. I think the monopoly rules, if you're over 50% of the market, then you're in violation of being a monopoly. So Google's at 90%. I think Apple's at 60% of the US phone market. So I'm all well and fine with it until they start abusing that politically. I mean, remember in 2020 when they took Parler off the App Store for the Apple App Store and for the Google App Store. So that's being a gatekeeper to information. Not cool with that one bit. So I'm in favor of demonopolizing this, but don't let it be forgotten that we're in this situation in the first place because of the government enabling it. No monopoly would become a monopoly would cease to exist if it wasn't for government intervention. Right? The freer the market, the better. And people conflate that a lot because, economically, I think the freest possible that a market could be is the best it could be. But I disagree with libertarians from the standpoint of libertarianism from a law and order standpoint, because that would turn into anarchy. So, 100% free market economically, but disagree with libertarians when it comes to law and order. Call me crazy. Last thing. Oh, we got 2 left. All right, so this is just a quick prediction. So, U.S. Military base was hit in Iraq. There are, I think, 5 U.S. soldiers injured, and we're praying for them. It's freaking infuriating that we let that happen and we don't have a vicious, swift response. But that's where we're at right now. Multiple U.S. bases have been attacked. I think it's been dozens in the past year, and we've done nothing about it, which is insane, which is something that nobody should be okay with. But that's the fact of the matter, unfortunately. And then, at the same time, we have reports coming out that Israel is building this or has already opened up this underground bunker for the administration to hide in because they're expecting an attack from Israel, an attack from Iran. Something I heard from Eric Prince the other day that's very concerning and interesting is that normally the Iron Dome is able to stop over 90% of missiles that come from adversaries incoming to Israel, but the cheap, low-range, low-trajectory missiles that Hezbollah has been firing at Israel have been hitting them at over a 50% rate. So normally the Iron Dome is 90% effective at stopping missiles, but these cheap, low-trajectory missiles that Hezbollah is using, that the build it in your garage missile, those are hitting at over a 50% rate. So it's same thing like what's going on in Ukraine. The garage drones are proving to be more effective than the $1 billion Lockheed Martin shit that we're sending over there. So they're finding holes in Israel's defense. It's like the zig when you zag. They're using this high-tech motion detector, GPS, infrared, yada yada system, and the other guys are using shit they built in a cave, and it's sneaking past at a higher rate than the expensive stuff. And with that said, Israel just fired missiles at Iran. Iran's threatening a serious response. Israel's taking it seriously. This feels a whole lot like we're getting dragged into a serious situation with Iran. Call me crazy, but it feels like there's this magnetic pull that's been happening over the past year to just drag us into some 10-year conflict, Iraq type of thing with Iran, which would be such a waste of life and money. My God. I totally agree that Iran is like the single biggest source of instability in the Middle East, the biggest problem that needs to be overcome in the Middle East, 100%. But, a slow-moving Iraq-style war is not the way to freaking do it. That's going to be so ineffective and expensive. It's unbelievable. The way to take Iran back is to empower the people to have a real revolution. Look what's happening in Venezuela. I'm praying that they could pull through and get that guy out of there. That's what needs to happen in Iran. I remember seeing a survey that over 50 or maybe even 70% of the population wanted a new form of government. And over 50% of the population uses VPN. So even though they're heavily censored as much as the government can do so, they have a lot of people who use a VPN to, get around that. So it's very important to supply them with, information that they have support from the rest of the world. and I guess let them know that we would have their back in that type of situation. That's a situation that foreign aid is actually productive, not a situation where we're just loan sharking people. So I feel in the air this push to make us go to war with Iraq, which is such a waste of time and money. But I know the military industrial complex and the rhinos would love it. Disgusting. I saw a meme about John McCain in the clouds the other day smiling about the notion of war with Iran. But no, we just need a Iran Revolution 2.0. And I mean, we need somebody to step up and say they would be the leader of it. I wish Reza would embrace that role, because you need somebody with name recognition to do that there. But I digress. That's how I see things with Iran. I see us getting pulled into something there because Israel is upping the ante. They're inevitably going to pressure us into having their back if they go to war with Iran. And I don't think that's the smartest way to do it. I mean, we spent $12 trillion getting what out of the war with Iraq? Nothing. We didn't even take the oil. So biggest waste of time, money, lives, everything. So we don't need a Iraq 2.0. That set us back decades. Disgusting. Anyway, last thing, this situation with X, very interesting. I don't think a lot of people are talking about this. Ready? Check this out.
I was shocked by the evidence uncovered by the House Judiciary Committee that a group of companies organized a systematic illegal boycott against X. It is just wrong, and that is why we are taking action. Today, we filed an antitrust lawsuit against the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, 4 of its key members, and the World Federation of Advertisers. These organizations targeted our company and you, our users.
So she's talking about this really interesting thing called GARM. GARM. Let me show you this thing real quick. I'm going to talk about this on Unusual Suspects tomorrow, but just to give you a quick rundown, check this out. GARM. Very interesting when this got started, right? So, Global Alliance for Responsible Media. What is GARM? The Global Alliance for Responsible Media is a cross-industry initiative established in 2019. Right before we had the biggest crackdown on social media censorship in our lifetime. So this thing is basically the gatekeeper for who gets monetized on places just like this one. So they're saying this is why X has had a hard time monetizing content and getting advertisers, because the vast majority of companies who do advertising on social media work through this institution or company or whatever. I mean, it's a very weird thing. So they take recommendations from NGOs. It feels very WEF-ish, and of course there's a WEF page with it. But it seems like they're acting as the gatekeeper for who can monetize content and which companies can pay to have content monetized on which platforms. And X and Rumble, of course, happen to be the biggest victims of it, according to what X and Rumble are saying. So today they officially filed a lawsuit against these companies, and I'm excited to see it. I think this is something that's been very under talked about and needs a big old light shined on it. I don't want to say too much about it because we're gonna get deep into it tomorrow. So I know I threw a lot at y'all today. There's a lot to catch up on. Just kind of did broad strokes and everything, but we back. Probably jump on tomorrow night with Berto or somebody and get after it. Seems like it's gonna be a increasingly crazy week out there. So love y'all. Thanks for watching. Glad to be back. Peace. Oh, like and subscribe.